Good afternoon. I thought my presentation was going to scare you guys, but Brad, I don't know what to say. I mean, you sit there, you're hopeful about all of the new technology innovations and all of that, and then you listen to the massive challenges ahead of us, and we really have to dig deep to come back with a lot of hope. And I think I'm going to lead you more into some of those massive challenges, particularly with respect to India. It's interesting when we talk about healthy aging, the one thing I realized is, and when we talk about older adults, I've realized I fall into that category now, officially. I turned 67 last week, so I'm talking about myself. And I think I see some of the people in the room kind of in the same boat there. I can get to the next slide, or do I need to click it? Sorry. So, I mean, the challenge with India is incredible. Earlier today, we heard about Africa, and when you take a look at some of the numbers, you can kind of equate the entire continent of Africa to India in terms of sheer numbers. Now, my own experience in terms of aging and learning about aging in India really is from personal experience. The folks that you see on the screen are my parents. My dad is 93 and my mom is 85, and they both live in a retirement community in India, and they're incredibly happy, they're smiling, and they were here to attend my son's wedding. They traveled across the globe about 3 weeks ago to attend the wedding. That is not the case for the aging population in India. Like the rest of the world, and like Brad effectively scared us, life expectancy is increasing, birth rates are falling. So a lot of those young people sitting in the audience, it's up to you to take care of us. So good luck. And you could see this whole population pyramid that Brad had mentioned. If the pyramid is a pyramid, it's good because now you got more people, younger people supporting olders. But the rest of the world is slimming, and some of the numbers you see in there are the population of the world. This is for the whole world between 2023 and 2050. India is somewhat similar in terms of the trending. The Indian population now has this phenomenal demographic dividend of young people in terms of the labor force. And you could see that bulge that's in the bottom migrating up over the next 20 or 30-year period. And that's going to cause instability in the system that Brad was talking about. The thing that's different about India is the scale. We're talking about 1.43 billion people. What did we talk about Africa? 1.4 billion people. And out of those 1.4 billion people, you've got 143 million people that are seniors today. And if you were to take a look at the United Nations and the 194 countries that are members of the UN, the bottom 80 countries, the entire population doesn't come up to 143 million people. This is today. If you take a look at 2050, the situation in terms of the overall population is a little bit better because India's reached replacement fertility rate already at 2.1, and so you're really not seeing the growth rate that we've seen in the past. It's kind of tapering off a little. But the senior population in India in 2050, we're looking at 347 million people, and that number is familiar to a lot of us. That's the population of the United States today. In case you're wondering about China, the China numbers of the total population are about comparable, but their senior numbers are twice as much. So they're going to face even a bigger problem. So hopefully I'm kind of getting up to scale, Brad's scale in terms of scaring you guys. Now, what's interesting about India, we were just having some fun with this. If you were to take a look at the different states of India and you equate the population of those states to different countries in the world, you could take a look at all the countries that would fit into India today. Now, the slide on your right is something that I put together a few years ago. I was called by the Department of Homeland Security to talk about cultural diversity in India. And I said, well, here's the population of India. India is probably the most diverse country genetically outside of Africa. So in addition to all of that, you've got some 36 entities, governmental entities across the country. You've got 22 languages, and most of them have different scripts. 300 dialects and distinct culture, cuisine, etc. And that essentially says to us that we're all going to age differently. We're born differently, we're going to age differently. And we'll see drastic differences in terms of aging, in terms of different parts of the country. How do you formulate national policy with that? Although I think with Brad's map of the United States, we're also seeing drastic differences in the United States. I'm just going to point out two states in India. One is Kerala, that's marked by K, and Bihar. In Kerala, they've got about 16.5% of the population are elderly, and in Bihar, a lot less. The life expectancy in Kerala is 75 years, which is comparable to the EU. The life expectancy in Bihar is about 64, which is comparable to Africa. Big difference. Although, if you take a look at the United States, between Hawaii and Mississippi, you've got a 9-year life expectancy difference. So when you start to look at designing policies for the elderly, it's always a challenge, right? You can't just say, you're old at 60, which is what the official age of retirement in India is. How do you attach a number, a measurement to a policy? There's a professor in Columbia University, a researcher in Columbia University, Arun Balachandran, who's been propagating this concept called RLE, or remaining life expectancy. And it's an interesting number to look at, because if you take a look at the remaining life expectancy at 60, which is what you really need to worry about in terms of designing retirement policies and old age care policies, the map across the country is relatively not so uneven. In 1955 in India, I believe at the age of 55, you had a 15-year remaining life expectancy. In 2015, at the age of 65, you had a 15-year remaining life expectancy. You're looking at age inflation like everything else. But that really does represent a new way of looking at a metric to start designing policies for the elder community. Now, 75% of the elderly population in India is rural. Again, it's very similar to the United States. I thought it was very different, but I guess I'm learning now that this is somewhat similar to the US in terms of the distribution. And if the problems of rural America are large, the problems on rural India are at a different scale completely in terms of access, communications, education, training, and resource availability, right? India's got a significant set of other challenges, like healthcare provider availability. The World Health Organization recommends one healthcare provider for every 1,000 people. In India, it's 1,500, one healthcare provider for every 1,500. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, except most of those folks are concentrated in the urban areas. When you take a look at the rural areas, you're going to look at a factor of 2x, 3x in terms of the differences in availability of healthcare providers. And of course, my cousin turned 60, and the large company he worked for said, "You're retired. If you want to continue working, you come back as a consultant." And it's not like here, a consultant gets paid at a higher margin rate than your salary rate. He gets paid about 60% of what he would have gotten paid as a regular employee as a consultant. And that's a real challenge. And there is no Social Security blanket as it stands. The government will tell you, yep, there is something, but I'll get into some of the details. And there is really no Social Security coverage. There is no safety net of any sort for most of the elders. And on top of that, you've got a significant lack of awareness and focus on elder needs. There was a study done, it was a longitudinal study of seniors in India, I think it was in 2017, and they found that 36% of the seniors over 60 work, and these are retired folks that come back and work. But what's really amazing is 12% of the men have pension, only 3% of the women have pension. And that's because 88% of the Indian workforce is in the informal work setting. They're not part of any kind of a defined benefit plan, no 401k, no Social Security payment, no pension, they used to call it Provident Fund. None of that stuff is available to them. The national pension plan that they talk about is for people that are below poverty level. And typically, I was talking to a government official, and the government official says, look, the central government gives you 200 rupees, and the state governments, for the most part, will give you about 600 rupees. That's like $10. If you are generous and you basically say, I'm going to use a purchasing power parity equation, it's like $40. That's the Social Security net that's there in India. And there are a few other, in terms of supporting the seniors, there are some pension enabling schemes, but again, that's only for the 12% of the people that are part of the workforce. The other things, most of the elders in India really are asset rich in some ways and cash poor. These are the folks that we're talking about that are in the top 15 to 20% of the country. The 80% are still basically up the creek without a paddle at this point. The Indian government, however, is making great strides in a couple of interesting things. And one of the programs is called Ayushman Bharat, where it's the world's largest insurance scheme, where they'll fund you up to 500,000 rupees for any medical emergencies if you are below poverty level. So it's at least a scheme to somewhat try to ameliorate some of these issues. And there are a bunch of nonprofit initiatives across the country, HelpAge India being the largest one. But the biggest challenge that they're facing, like the rest of the world, is the funding and the scaling of the issues, and the scales are absolutely massive. I had an opportunity to speak with some of the senior living community leaders in India to see what that opportunity looks like. And they keep talking about numbers like the investment opportunity just in senior living in India is $15 to $17 billion a year. Seems like a significant market to look at. And there are folks like Columbia Pacific from the US that have gone into India. They're purchasing retirement communities, and they're building new facilities to bring some level of senior living for folks in the middle class. So that'll be interesting. But for the most part, there's a hierarchy that in terms of care, only the top 12, maybe 15% of the country can really afford to be in any of these senior living communities. I mean, that's a big number out of 143 million. It's not bad. I'm sure Scott's sitting there saying, hey, that's a good market that I can go after. There are also some emerging companies out there that are working on aging at home technologies. They're very highly technologically leveraged. Imoha, for example, is an organization that I spoke with that have just gotten international funding for the Series B. So there is investment interest from abroad for the Indian, at least the aging at home market. But the question is still one of trained staff and affordability. This is the aged care hierarchy that I spoke about. The ultra-rich essentially get cared for in their homes. The upper middle class may be able to get to the senior living communities. And just from a cost perspective, we're looking at about 50,000 rupees to 100,000 rupees to live in one of these senior living communities. And the equivalent is basically, if you again doing the purchasing power parity calculation, it's about $2,400 to $4,800 a month. Pretty significant. But the bulk of the senior care across the country is provided by families. And there's a lot of frustration with both the bureaucracy in the government and a lot of the senior living industry leaders, because they're all basically saying, we've really got this policy of complacency, and it's completely irresponsible on the part of the government. But the challenge is, you saw the demographic bulge pyramid, and the bulge in the middle is 525 million people in the working environment. And the labor participation in India is 28%, compared to 62 or 68% of the United States. So you really got to satisfy that vote bank to make sure that you survive into the next election, and that's where the focus is primarily. The significant number of the seniors that are in the country aren't powerful enough of a voting bloc to sway what the government policies dictate. So maybe I had to end this thing with some kind of hope. I couldn't end it with the scary despair situation. India has done some very interesting things. It got a very strong digitization and AI initiatives across all parts of the government. And I know recently, John and Brian and everybody else had gone to India for a large digital health conference, and you saw a lot of the innovations that are happening there. An interesting fact about India is it is rated as the #1 country amongst the G20 and OECD countries in terms of AI skills and training capability today. They've also accomplished something which I think is phenomenal, something called an Aadhaar card, which is a unique ID that 1.4 billion people have. I mean, imagine the asset base that represents and the possibilities for innovation that can come from just having that capability. The other thing that's happening in terms of innovation on the finance side, and when you talk about health, you're not really looking at financial transactions and capabilities in the banking side of the industry, but this thing called UPI, Universal Payment Interchange, that they have, will allow me really to send a person-to-person financial transaction directly. I can probably send you money if I have a UPI number, and I really don't care whether you have a Zelle or imagine being able to send money from a Zelle to a Venmo to any of these other PayPal or any of these guys directly, right? And they've got that capability. And you go to any vendor in India today, there's persons on a street with selling you coconuts, and they've got a little QR code, and that's how you pay them. The project that is happening now, which is also quite interesting, is the Universal Health Identifier. It's a massive effort that is underway, and if it is any kind of a success similar to what UPI has had, we've got the potential for bringing efficiencies into the system. Okay. And it is associated with this Ayushman Bharat's digital mission that hopefully one of these days you'll hear a lot more about, but it is really a digitization program for the entire country, and it's an incredibly strong program. What do we need to do? What are some of the things that we need to be focusing on in the face of this problem? And we've heard this from everybody up to this point. Technology is the driver. You've really got to make sure that you use a technology and create many of caregiving model experiments. And the caregiving model experiments use technology as a tool, but they need to fundamentally change the way care is being delivered. Because the current model of delivery, where it says, look, I've got one person taking care of a senior, isn't going to work. We've got to find a way to maybe do cohort care. You've got to create ways of enabling the caregivers and provide support for them, give them the technology tools, the support tools, et cetera, and enable them to provide services and leverage a lot of the capabilities that are in the system already, with these large digital initiatives. And the other part of it that is really critical, and I think Brad alluded to this is in terms of we need to enable the elders to work. They're already doing it. We've got to find a way to go make sure that we create work environments for them, working with the corporations, maybe really work on doing things like work pair collaboratives, where you assign two people to share a job, or one senior and a younger person to essentially share a job. So there are innovations that we need to create in the space. And elder housing mods. I just saw an innovation here in the US, which is interesting, where Louis Tannenbaum is working on a legislation to enable people to take money out of the 401k plans for senior home modifications and not get penalized. So innovations of that nature really are the things that will fundamentally allow you to spread activity across the system. And of course, India's really got to think about this notion of social security and pension, and how what kind of a social security safety net they can build for the population, for the senior population. Well, I wanted to make sure that I acknowledged all of the people that I've spoken to in this India senior living industry, and I'm grateful for the time. And remember I told you about the 22 major languages? A lot of these things are in the different scripts, and a lot of these languages are different scripts. So if you take a person from the northern part of India and put them in the southern part of India, they're not going to understand what's going on, and they'll never be able to read the road signs if it's not in English, right? So that's it, my time's up, and thank you.